All right, so tonight we're going to start a two-part class on Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Pretty important topic, and we're going to use the discussion of Qumran to get us to the Dead Sea Scrolls, okay? But it's really primarily about the Dead Sea Scrolls because that's a really important topic for us as Christians and in New Testament, Old Testament studies primarily. So that's why we're doing that. But it's important, I think, for us to understand the context that the scrolls come from. That's why we're going to talk about Qumran. So again, papers are there on the trolley. If you don't have them, definitely pick up a set. You're going to need them for the next couple of classes. All right, so the community at Qumran, let's talk about that. It's located down by the Dead Sea. It's almost due east from Jerusalem. Okay, so if you were to drop a pin on a map in Jerusalem and go east, you would eventually get to the community at Qumran. The ruins there have been well excavated. Okay, we're going to see some photos later in the class, but they have been well excavated. There's been a lot of excavations that have been done down there, a lot of discoveries, a lot of interesting discoveries, and because of that, we have a pretty good grasp of what the community there was about. The members of this community were responsible for the preservation or copying of the majority of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, when we talk about Dead Sea Scrolls, we usually think biblical, right? Most of us probably think biblical, but there are a lot of Dead Sea Scrolls that are not biblical at all. They have nothing to do with the Bible, and there are a lot of scrolls that have been, and documents that have been recovered down by the Dead Sea that have nothing to do with the Bible either. But this community was responsible for the preservation and or the copying of the majority of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So most of what we talk about, biblical or otherwise, come as a result of that community. The community at Qumran, as well as the Dead Sea Scrolls, has been the subject of much debate among scholars. Okay, we're not going to really get into that in this class. Also, a fair amount of sensationalism. It seems that anytime there's any kind of discovery that has anything to do with the Bible or the biblical world, there's always a lot of sensationalism about that. Usually what happens is when things kind of settle down, you discover that that sensationalism was just sensationalism and nothing more, okay? When you get down and you actually study what's been found and what it's all about, it may be sensational in that it's wonderful and it's great and it's really interesting and it helps biblical studies, but it's not sensationalism like the popular media like to say. So for example, years back, there was this discovery, or the rediscovery, if you will, of what was called the Gospel of Judas, okay? That was a very sensational discovery. National Geographic picked up on that and published a couple of books about it, and they made shows about it, and they were proclaiming that now we have a better picture of the Judas of the Bible. Well, once people get a chance to study that material, they find out that it isn't anything to do with the Bible. In fact, it's a Gnostic document, not a New Testament document. And so that sensationalism then goes away. And so today, probably very few of you have ever heard of the Gospel of Judas. Raise your hand if you've heard about it, not from me. If you've heard it from me, that didn't count, okay? Most of you have not. But it really was a big thing probably about 20 years ago, because I did a lecture in the Czech Republic on that topic because it made its way there and it was sensational and people had questions about it. So the community at Qumran is that kind of a thing. It's the case with the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves. But again, most of that stuff that's put out there really has nothing to do with reality, nothing to do with truth. Okay, so let me give you a picture to give you an idea. I guess I could have given you a map, but instead I gave you a picture. This is Qumran and its environs, so the area around it. You will notice on the map this big body of water over here is the Dead Sea. This is the wilderness of Judea over here. And then you have in that circle right there the ruins of Qumran. Okay, so it's located close to the Dead Sea, obviously. And what you have here, and you may be able to see this in the picture, is from Qumran up. That's an escarpment right there. It's a steep incline up to the wilderness of Judea, okay? And that geographical formation is important because there are a whole bunch of what in that formation? Anybody know? Caves, okay? There's a whole bunch of caves in that formation. Hence, when we get to the Dead Sea Scrolls, we're going to read about the fact that they were hidden in caves, okay? They're near the community of Qumran. All right, so let's talk then a little bit about the Essenes, what these folks are all about. We did talk about them earlier in an earlier class, but not in any kind of a detail. The community at Qumran is an Essene community, okay? That's the sect of the Jews that are living there. That particular sect is not mentioned in the New Testament, so if you're looking for a book, chapter, and verse for the Essenes, you're not going to find it. It isn't there, okay? They're the only of the 4 sects in the New Testament period that are not mentioned in the New Testament itself. However, a Roman historian whose name was Pliny the Elder, mentioned a group of Essenes living on the western shore of the Dead Sea during the 1st century. So Pliny the Elder is writing, and he's writing about things, he's writing about a lot of different things, but he's writing about this area, and he writes about the fact that there's a group of Essenes that are living down there on the western shore of the Dead Sea during the 1st century. So it's the right time, the right place, and that's the group that we're looking at. By the way, anybody here happen to remember whatever happened to Pliny the Elder? He's killed at Pompeii. Yeah, he's observing the eruption at Vesuvius. You know, the problem with volcanoes is don't get too close, okay? So he is actually killed during the eruption of Vesuvius. Pompeii, that's I think 68, 69 AD, something like that. So that's when he dies. Then there's also Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger is Pliny the Elder's nephew, I believe. Pliny the Younger is well known because later on he's a governor in Asia Minor. And he's got some problems in his province with some folks that are called Christians. And he doesn't know quite what to do with these people. So he sends letters to the Roman emperor asking him, what are we supposed to do with these Christians? And we have all of that correspondence between the emperor and Pliny the Younger about this problem of the Christians, and it gives us insight. You may remember the lecture I did on the Christians in Rome, or Roman persecution of the Christians. I mentioned those letters because they help us to understand what's going on. So, Pliny the Elder is a writer. He writes about a lot of different things. He mentions the Essenes that are down there. This particular group, the Essenes, they are an ascetic and separatist group that believed the Jerusalem establishment and the temple were corrupt. So when we talk about ascetics, what are these people? What do? They live a very simple lifestyle, a lot of self-denial, a lot of self-punishment, physical self-punishment, okay, to keep the body in check. They're also separatist in that they don't really have much to do with the Jewish people as a whole. Certainly not with the establishment in Jerusalem and the temple, because they believe they're all corrupt. Remember, who controls the temple in the 1st century? The Sadducees do, okay? And so the Essenes look at the Sadducees and they say, they're all corrupt. And they look at the aristocrats. I almost said Aristocats. That would be a Disney movie, not who we're talking about. Aristocrats. He looks at the aristocrats, or they look at the aristocrats, and they say they're all corrupt. Okay? People have been saying these kinds of things for a very long time. Well, their solution to that is, let's go down to the Dead Sea area. No one likes to live down there anyways. And we'll establish basically a monastery. The community at Qumran is a New Testament equivalent of monasteries that existed in the ancient Near East and in Europe, starting in the 300s AD and going all the way up till today. We still have monasteries today. So they're that kind of a community. Okay, so Tom's got a question. Jeff's going to come to you with the mic. And then you can talk. Now, see, you had the opportunity, right, to have that mic? No.
Would they have had any affiliation with the Zealots? Or
with who?
With the Zealots, or would they be considered like the Zealots?
They are not Zealots, and probably had very little to no connection with them. Certainly no affiliation. Okay, the Zealots are separatist also in that we want to separate the Romans from our area, but the Essenes are really about religion. That's what they're about. Okay, I don't recall ever reading anything about the Essenes joining in the revolt against Rome that the Zealots are leading. Okay, as a matter of fact, one reason we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I'm gonna say this later as well in this material, one reason we have the Dead Sea Scrolls is because when revolt breaks out in Judea, the Essenes at Qumran know very well that eventually the Roman armies are going to come to their little community, and they're not in a fortress, okay? And so they don't want their documents to be destroyed. And so they take them up to these caves and they store them. Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls are the religious library of this community. Okay, some of the other things that get left up in the Dead Sea caves are marriage contracts, deeds to property. People bring things down and they hide them in the caves, intending when the revolt is over to come back and get them. When you read those marriage contracts and deeds of ownership, you are reading documents from people who never went back for them. You know why, okay? They died in the meantime, probably killed in the revolt, and so they never went back and got those things. Bad for them, good for us, because these documents allow us to have insight into society, and certainly with the Dead Sea Scrolls, their importance for biblical studies is great. And so if the community at Qumran had gone back for those things, who knows whether they would have lasted and survived till today. But they're living down there. They want to stay separate. They're not real interested in associating with other Jewish folks. There are some Essene communities elsewhere and some Essenes living elsewhere. There are some Essenes that live in Jerusalem. But the community at Qumran are the ones that are saying in their minds, we don't want to have anything to do with the Jewish establishment, so we're going to go down there and live by ourselves. Okay? Not every Essene took that extreme of a view, but these folks did. All right, so let's look at the community itself, just the site, not the people, okay? There is a long history of settlement here. During the 8th and 7th centuries BC, okay, there were already people living at this location. There is a cistern there that dates to the time of King Uzziah, okay, of Judah. That's 7th, 8th century BC. There could have been something there older, but we certainly can date the settlement, if you will, from that time frame. During 131 to 31 BC, it was settled, or resettled maybe is a better way to say that, during the reign of John Hyrcanus. John Hyrcanus was from what dynasty? See how I do that? I keep bringing old stuff back up to see if you remember. What's the dynasty of John Hyrcanus? Hasmoneans, okay, Hasmoneans, that's his dynasty. So it settled during the reign of John Hyrcanus, but it was destroyed by an earthquake in 31 BC. So for about 100 years, there's a Jewish settlement on the site. It apparently is a very good place to live because people have lived there off and on over the centuries. Then from 4 BC to 68 AD, it was rebuilt during the time of Archelaus, but then destroyed by Roman soldiers on their way to suppress the Jewish revolt, okay? So at this point in time, it's an Essene community, okay? By the time you get to the Jewish revolt, those are the people that are living there. And indeed, the fears of the Essenes were well-founded, because as Roman soldiers are on their way to Jerusalem to suppress the revolt, they come across this community on the shores of the Dead Sea, and they destroy them. Had the community not hidden their library, we would not have the Dead Sea Scrolls today. Okay, they would have been destroyed by those Roman soldiers. It is also entirely possible, and this is not meant to be sensational, but it is entirely possible that there were parts of the library that were actually captured and destroyed by Roman soldiers, okay? What we have today is what has been found, and by the way, they still find things today. Okay, they're usually incredibly tiny fragments as they sift through the dirt in the caves. They're not finding the big jars with scrolls in them anymore, but they do still find fragments from time to time. So, who knows what exactly was lost during that time, but in 68 AD, the community's gone, okay? The actual settlement is destroyed. The Essenes, if they didn't flee, would have been killed. Then in 132 to 135 AD, during that second great Jewish revolt against Rome, it's called the Bar Kokhba revolt, Jewish rebels go down there and use it as a post, okay? Because it is an area that would be significant if you're trying to observe troops that are moving in from the south. And so they go down there, they use it as a post during that time. All right, so some photographs to share with y'all. I'm assuming if you've got questions, you'll raise your hands. The first of those, this photograph here, is an aerial view. So you see the ruins. Again, they're pretty well excavated. The cistern that we talked about earlier, the one that's 7th to 8th century BC, that's it right there. What is a cistern? It's for holding water, okay? It would have been a hole either in the rock, or it would have been dug and then lined with brick in some way, and then it would have been sealed with lime, okay, or plaster to prevent water from leaking out. Just like if you have a swimming pool, what do? If you have an in-ground swimming pool in your backyard, it gets a crack in it, what do? You don't throw it away, you reseal it, okay? You reseal it, you repair it. And so cisterns could be repaired to make sure that they kept holding water. So where do they get all that water for that cistern? Where do you get all this water? Down at the Dead Sea, where it hardly ever rains. And the Dead Sea is salty. When it does rain, that's right. But here in the community, they're getting it off their roofs, okay? Because they would build it in such a way that water would drain off the roofs when it rains and fill up the cistern. How many of y'all have ever had a rain barrel in your backyard? All right? I used to have a rain barrel, and I got tired of the way the water stunk in it after, when it's Texas summer and it hasn't rained for like 2 months and there's a little water in the bottom of it, it just smells really bad, and I got tired of it, so I got rid of the rain barrel. Don't collect rain anymore. But that's the same situation they would have. You have a cistern, it's collecting rainwater that's coming off their roofs that are otherwise, for the rest of the year, dusty and dirty. So it's not high quality water here, right? If you ever complain about the Fort Worth water, it could be a whole lot worse. You could be drinking Qumran water. So they have the cistern there to provide water for the community. Then you have a watchtower over here. The purpose of a watchtower is to watch. Good. All right. Purpose of a watchtower is to watch, and so they have that there so they can see. Now, if you're looking up there and you're saying, what are all those things on the watchtower? Do they look like flowers to you? They're people. Okay, I'm pretty sure they're people. They're not flowers. There are no flowers up there. I'm pretty sure it's a tour group or something, and they've all got the same clothes on. I don't know, but that's the watchtower. Over here you have the dining hall. We'll see some pictures of that in a little while. And then you have, and this is a very significant building, it's called the scriptorium. Okay, a scriptorium was a place where they did what? Where they copied things. They copied the scrolls, okay? We'll see some pictures of that also. That's the scriptorium. That's an aerial view. Here is a map. If you go to Qumran today, I have not been. This is just something that I got off the internet. But this is, I guess, a diagram that's available there. When you go, notice that the first language up here is Hebrew. That's a dead giveaway. Then you've got all these down here in English. It's a suggested reconstruction of Qumran, so you get the idea that the buildings are pretty impressive, all right? You've got your cistern right there. These other numbers, let's see, number 1 there is a ritual bath. What's a ritual bath? What do we usually call those? Well, we do. What did they call them? Mikvahs, okay? And so you see that there's not 1, but 2 that are there. There's another one over here, and another one over here, and another one there, and another one there. Do you begin to see that ritual bathing was pretty important for these folks at Qumran? It was, okay? They were sticklers for following all the rules of ritual purity. And so they have these installations that are built there so that they can wash in them. So even though they're in a location that really wouldn't have a whole lot of water in it, they've got enough installations that have got water in them for them to use. And as far as I know, they're all being fed by rainwater, okay, when it does rain down there. There are times when it rains a lot, doesn't rain enough to make the land arable, but at least rains enough to fill up their water installations for drinking and also for ritual purification. By the way, I'll just point this out, that Any Jewish synagogue in the first century would have had these. Okay? So when you hear about the Apostle Paul and others going and baptizing people, they could have used the ocean, they could have used rivers. They also would have had access to these installations. We talked about the city of Jerusalem. 3,000 are baptized on the day of Pentecost. Where in the world do you baptize that many people? Well, the pools and the mikvahs in Jerusalem that are there for purification. So there would have been lots of ways to do that. All right, this is a computer-generated image. Not AI. This was in the days before AI, but a computer-generated image to give you an idea of what the community would have looked like. You see down here some of that water, the watchtower over here. Pretty impressive structures. It's not a fortress, though. Okay, the walls are not tall enough to be a fortress. All right, this is the cistern from the Iron Age. Sorry, got it here, didn't get it there. Let's do that. There we go. So that is the cistern. You get a feel for it, right? It's kind of deep. You can see the remains of plaster there on the walls. It would have held a lot of water for the community. Okay. Next photograph is of the watchtower. And you see some people that have climbed up there. Again, it's not a tower like we think of. It's not a tower that's 100 feet tall. It's a tower that would have given them the ability to see what's around. Because if you're this group down by the Dead Sea, who are you concerned about? Concerned about Roman soldiers during the revolt. Who else might you be concerned about? Any other soldiers that might be marching through. Who else might you be concerned about? Remember Jesus' Good Samaritan? On the way to Jericho, he falls among thieves. Okay? There are groups of bandits that are active as well. The wilderness of Judea is right there by the settlement. And that's a good place for bandits to hide. Okay? So you're watching for those kind of things. That's why you have a watchtower. This is, again, computer-generated reconstruction of the watchtower. It could have served as a mini fortress if you look at that sloping wall going up. That if you needed to, you could get your people inside that tower, and it would be very, very hard for anybody to break into it. But it would not protect you from a dedicated army. So when the Romans come, I suspect if the Essenes hold up in that, the Romans first got a good laugh out of it and then destroyed it. Okay, it would not hold back an army, but it might hold back bandits that happen to be in the area. All right, next photograph. This is the dining hall. You could tell from the photograph that it was fairly large. You can also tell from the aerial photograph. You can tell from this photograph as well how large it is, because you've got that line of tourists that have so conveniently placed themselves in that picture so that we can get scale. Okay, that's a pretty big dining hall, isn't it? There would have been apparently about 3 rows of tables in place, and the community ate their meals in silence. Okay. That's what we find in medieval monasteries later. Monks would eat in silence. All right? So here in the community, they ate in silence. They all ate together. They had 3 rows of tables so that they could all eat in the same room. Next photograph. These are dining vessels that were recovered at Qumran. They're in pretty good shape, aren't they? Some of them are broken. A lot of them are not. They actually uncovered more than 1,000 complete vessels in excavating at Qumran. 708 of those were cups, 210 of those were plates, and 108 were salad bowls. I love that description. 108 were salad bowls. I'm not sure how much they were eating salad down at Qumran, but 108 of them were salad bowls. I tend to think they were probably eating soup out of those salad bowls, but who knows, okay? All of these were serving vessels, and they had never been fired. All right? So a pretty significant, that's just some of them that were recovered. It's not the full 1,000. All right, next photograph. This is the scriptorium at Qumran. Again, it's a room that was used for copying manuscripts. Apparently, 10 men were constantly employed in copying. That was a big thing about what they did at Qumran. They were copying scrolls. Okay, and so there were 10 men who were doing that constantly, copying scrolls in the scriptorium. I would imagine they worked in shifts. Okay, it wasn't always the same 10 guys, but it takes a long time to copy something, doesn't it? For instance, Your homework assignment between now and Sunday is to copy the entire book of John, word for word, by hand. If you're working a job, take a couple of days of vacation. You're going to need them to get that done. And I'm not expecting that all of you will do it. I'm actually not expecting that any of you will do it, but I can always be optimistic. It takes a long time to copy things by hand, and so you've got people that are doing this, and that's just one part of the New Testament. They're not copying, by the way, the Gospel of John. They're copying Old Testament books. They're copying documents like commentaries on Old Testament books. Yes, they had commentaries back then just like we have commentaries today, and the only way to get a new copy is to do it by hand, because there are no Xerox machines, okay? No photocopies, no digital cameras. So they're doing this work because it's an important work, and when one wears out, you better have a replacement for it, because you don't want to run out. All right, next photograph. These are stairs. The scriptorium actually was a two-story building, and these are the remains of the stairs going up to the second story, okay? I think a lot of times we just think of these places as having wooden ladders or whatever. They had stone stairs, just like we're probably a little bit more accustomed to. Next photograph, again, is a computer-generated artistic rendition of the scriptorium. So you get some light there from the windows. You get some candlelight or lamp light, if you will, as well. And then you've got the tables where benches, where they're sitting. They're sitting on stone benches, hunched over to make the copies that they're making. Okay? So you can just imagine being in a room like that. There are 10 other guys in there. They're copying. They're using quills and things like that. And that would be the sounds you would hear, except when you hear the occasional oops in Hebrew. Okay? And oops might have been followed by some other words that were not so nice, because if you make too big of an oopsie, what happens? Yeah, you get to start over, okay? You don't want to make an oopsie on the last page. Actually, they had ways of erasing. They had ways of scratching it out and going in and correcting it, but you wanted your work to be good, okay? They were professionals, and so they would have been up there working in that room by sunlight and by lamplight, depending upon the time of the day and the time of the year. These are some inkwells that have also been recovered at Qumran. These were found in the second story room of the scriptorium. So that's how they know it was a scriptorium, because that's the only reason why you would have this number of inkwells up there. And so they've got inkwells. I mean, think about people in the Revolutionary period. They had an inkwell and a quill pen, and they're dipping it in, and they're writing, and they're dipping it in, and they're writing it. It was the same way in the ancient world. Okay, whatever their instrument was, I don't know if they used quills or if they used pieces of wood, but they would have used something to do that, and they needed their ink in the wells. All right, so any questions about that before we move on? Nope. All right. So looking at these folks again, life and ritual. Again, water was brought two ways, okay? Brought by aqueduct during periods of heavy rain and stored in cisterns and other water installations, and it came off the roofs as well, okay? So you've got water coming off the roofs. You have an aqueduct that is bringing in, we'll see pictures of that in just a moment, whenever there's rain, which is not often. So you've got to store up as much as you can when it rains, because when the rain is gone, that's it. And as you're drinking that water, you're really hoping that fresh rain is going to come soon, because the water gets really stale over time. And it's picked up all the dirt and other stuff as it's moving into the cistern or the mikvahs. They had these mikvahs there. Again, we've seen that on the picture. It was used for ritual purification. The residents practiced immersion twice daily. So if you were an Essene living at Qumran, you took a bath not once, but twice. Okay, now don't think of this as taking a bath with a bar of soap and all of that. It's dunking in the water. Okay, but you did that twice a day because that's what the community required. 7 or 8 of those have been found at Qumran. How do we know 7 or 8? Why is it 7? Why is it 8? Why is it 7 or 8? Because one of them is not clear whether it is or is not. So at least 7, maybe as many as 8, are located there at Qumran. So their life would have revolved around 2 immersions, whatever else work they're doing, and probably a great deal of upkeep of the water installations, because they require upkeep. Any of y'all have an in-ground swimming pool? I know John does. John, it's indoors, but it's outdoors. That's really complicated to explain. You'd have to see it to believe it. But you have a big swimming pool. Swimming pools take a lot of work. Okay? Take a lot of work to keep all those. Now, granted, they weren't putting chemicals in there, but chemicals and all of that, they require upkeep. My parents, when they lived in Irving, had a big in-ground swimming pool. When I saw how much it involved and how much it cost, I said, that is why I am never going to have an in-ground swimming pool. And indeed, we do not. We have resisted that for years when my kids really wanted one. No, we're not having one of those because they're really, really expensive, because they just require a lot of work. All right? So they would have been working on things like that, keeping the buildings in shape. The other thing to note about their life and ritual is that they had latrines. They did not have indoor plumbing. They had outdoor plumbing, and they didn't have plumbing. They just had outdoor toilets. And those were located 1,600 feet from the settlement. That was a result of strict adherence to ritual purity. So, if you've got to go to the bathroom, how far do you have to walk? 1,600 feet. There and 1,600 feet back. And if you've got to go in the middle of the night, what are you going to do? You're going to go 1,600 feet there in the middle of the night, 1,600 feet back in the middle of the night, okay? Because taking care of your business was taken care of outside of the settlement because of the law of Moses and their very strict adherence to it, okay? We'll see some pictures here in just a moment. Just to give you an idea how far 1,600 feet is, it's 4.5 times the length of a football field, or 1/3 of a mile. So back in the ancient world, before they had smartwatches, before they were really concerned about their steps, they undoubtedly got all their steps because you went, every time you needed to go, 2/3 of a mile. I cannot even imagine. And that's what they did. All of the folks that lived there. And there weren't 5, and there weren't 10. Okay, I think it was around 200 people living there at one time. All right. So, next photograph, this is the aqueduct. If you're looking at that and saying that's really, really small, you would be right, it is really, really small. We're used to seeing aqueducts in Roman places like the one at Caesarea. They're big, they're impressive. There's not much impressive about that aqueduct, but that's what it was. It brought at least some water from the mountains down into the settlement to supplement what was coming off their roofs. Next photograph, this is one of those mikvahs at Qumran, and if you're saying that looks an awful lot like a baptistry, you're exactly right. Okay, it looks an awful lot like a baptistry because the form hasn't changed. If you're going to have to ritually immerse someone, and they were immersing twice a day, you got to walk down into the water so that you can immerse yourself in the water, and then you walk back up out of the water. So mikvahs looked an awful lot like baptistries. I might also just point out that if you go to some places that have had that have a Christian background that has lasted from the 1st century, you will find all sorts of interesting things. You will find baptistries that are clearly not for infants. There is a church in northern Italy that Yvonne and I have visited, and when you go into that church, there is a font over here that holds, 10, 15 gallons of water, clearly for sprinkling. In the same church, there's a baptistry that holds a couple of 100 gallons of water that has steps going down into it. It is clearly not for sprinkling. It's for what? It's for immersion. By the way, which one of those do you think is earlier? Which one is later? The immersion is earlier. Okay? The immersion dates, I think, to the 4th century AD. Whereas the sprinkling font is much, much later. And you see these in places, all right? When you go to some of the really, really old Catholic churches in parts of Europe that have been, quote-unquote, Christianized for a very long time, you'll see these baptistries that are clearly not made for sprinkling some water. The design we find among the Jewish settlements is very, very similar. It's very similar to what you'd find up there. I don't know how many of y'all have seen our baptistry here, but some of you have because you've been baptized in it. Some of you have not. There are steps from both sides going down into the water. It's the exact same principle. Okay? All right, next photograph. This is another mikvah from Qumran. Not looking in real good shape, is it? That one, that big crack in there, is a result of the earthquake in 31 BC. So apparently, the community at Qumran chose not to repair this one. Okay, they just left it. I don't know why. Maybe the crack was too much for them to overcome. I don't know. Okay, but that one was never repaired, but that was what's left of a mikvah that was destroyed at that time. All right, next photograph, going back to those latrines. This is the latrine area way out there in that far distance of the photograph. So that's where they're going. Remember, we said they're ascetics, right? Denial of the body. So we see that in, not only are they interested in maintaining purity, but they're doing it in that way as well. All right, so looking at the community itself, who all's living down there? Well, the inhabitants were men. Just think of a medieval monastery where they're all monks, therefore they are all men. Okay, what's the equivalent for the women? A nunnery, or a monastery for nuns. Okay, and you have both of those in the Middle Ages. Qumran is just for men. All right, there are a handful of graves of women and children have been found, but they are apparently later Bedouin burials. So Bedouin have been going back and forth across that area for centuries. If they happen to have a member of their community die, they buried them there at Qumran. But the people that were actually living at Qumran were all men. The average population at any given time was about 200 people, and the population was young. Most excavated graves contained individuals under 35 years old. Okay. Now, granted, people did not live as long in the first century. So even with an average age of probably around 50 to 55 in the first century, 35 is still pretty young. And that's the upper age. So a lot of these people are a lot younger than that there at Qumran. Life was hard. Life was hard for these folks. And certainly I would say that, how shall I say this? At my age of 55, I would probably be rethinking that whole Jerusalem and establishment thing, whether I couldn't move north and live somewhere, or move west, and live a little bit easier lifestyle. Okay, so maybe what you end up with is that while men are young and stupid, they might be living down at Qumran, and then when they get older and wiser, they say, hey, there are other places we can live. If there's anybody here, there's a couple of y'all that are under 35. That was not meant as an insult to our under 35-year-olds. But sometimes we do things when we're young, and we learn as we get older that we don't need to do those things anymore. With age hopefully comes some wisdom. But at any rate, they're a very young community, the people that are actually staying there. Where the others went, I don't think they all died before they were 35. I think they just left the community maybe to move somewhere else. All right, that is the community at Qumran. That would be a logical stopping place tonight, especially if you've got some questions that you want to ask that are really hard and will take about, 5 more minutes. Stacy's got a question. And Jeff, if you'll bring the mic over to her, you don't need to hurry. Take your time and bring the mic to her. We really are at a good stopping spot. Okay, I was joking. You can go a little faster than that. Stacy, what's your question?
From an artist's point of view, as you get a little bit older, your eyes get a little bit dimmer. And that didn't look like a really great way for somebody to copy. And so a younger person would probably be needed to successfully copy something.
That is a valid point. At an older age, they would most definitely have found copying very difficult. Okay? Those of you that do not wear glasses, enjoy your time. Because when you hit 45, you're going to wear glasses whether you like it or not. Okay? Because it's just a fact of aging of the eyes that by about 45, certainly by the age of 50, you're going to join all the rest of us that have multi-line bifocals or progressive lenses or whatever, because it just kind of goes with the territory. Unless you get cataracts and you get lens replacements, in which case you can get rid of your glasses. Yeah, but that would have probably been a consideration as to who works in the scriptorium, who can write and who cannot. I gave up printed books a while back. I don't even buy printed books anymore. I can't read them. It's too difficult. And I have progressive lenses, okay? But boy, sitting there with a book, trying to read a book that's printed with progressive lenses is a nightmare. And so I just prefer to do electronically because I can make the print, I don't have to have it that big, but I can make the print bigger. They couldn't do that at a scriptorium. And if they're using lamps for light, and if they're using sunlight, it probably wouldn't have been lit real well. Plus, the other thing that happens when you reach a certain age is, can you imagine sitting on those benches hunched over all the time? Pain kicks in, too, with arthritis that comes with age. Right? Good comment. Any other comments or questions? This is a tough crowd tonight. Bryant's got one. I haven't had many questions and comments tonight. Bryant's going to give us a tough one.
Why would the Roman army destroy this community if they have nothing to do with the revolt in Jerusalem? It's just because they're in the way?
Because they're Jews. And at this point in time, because all of Judea is in rebellion, we're not going to leave this community behind us. We're going to take what we want from it. So they undoubtedly took whatever stores of food they could find. Whatever inhabitants they found were probably killed or carried off into slavery. And left it desolated. I'm not sure I would say that they probably destroyed all the buildings, but they destroyed it enough that it wasn't a threat to them, to their rear. It's a little bit like some of our decisions about which islands to take in the Pacific during World War II. Were not always based on we need that island, but it was, we don't want the Japanese having that island because then they're behind us as we're advancing on Tokyo. And so they would knock off any of these communities that they perceived to be a potential threat to them as they're, suppressing the revolt. And plus the reality is, when you declare war against Rome, they don't care whether you're innocent or not. You're a part of the nation that's fighting against us, and so we're going to treat you however we want to. If they did capture any men there, they probably would have brought them along with them to work as slaves for, doing the grunt work of the Roman army. We need to build siege ramps. We need to do things like that. That's what y'all get stuck doing. Because again, why would we do that? Right? Especially when we've got people that, we can make do that for us. Good comment, good question. Any other questions? All right, way over here, Jeff to Rusty. Jeff's rethinking that whole volunteer to handle the mic thing, right, Jeff?
We've seen better men do it.
So I would just wonder if you could talk about the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Weren't they discovered in the 40s?
I can't talk about that, Rusty. I absolutely cannot talk about that because that would get me into the material that we're going to talk about on Sunday.
Oh, okay.
There's a reason why I stopped right here.
Okay.
We will talk about that on Sunday.
Or are you going to talk about how they actually got into the caves too?
I'm going to talk about how they were discovered.
Yeah. Well, probably.
I'm not going to let you nail me down on exactly what I'm going to say because I'm not sure I'm going to describe exactly how they got into the caves. I'm going to talk about how they were discovered.
They must have been hidden pretty well for the Romans not to really, find, I guess, all of them.
I'm not sure the Romans were real interested in digging around in caves at that point in time. If there weren't any people in them, they weren't a threat to them, so they just moved on.
Okay.
I mean, the community is down. Let's see. I can do this. I can go back to that right there, which is really easy on my computer, and it's really harder on that. So just let me scroll back a lot. When I keep scrolling, don't get dizzy. We'll eventually get back to, that is the downside of the system of me not controlling this from here, is that it's really hard to get all the way back, but we can get there nonetheless, maybe. There we go. So when you're looking at that map again, this is the Dead Sea over here, okay? The Dead Sea is lower today than it was in ancient times. As a matter of fact, I just saw a picture today on the news of a dock on the Dead Sea. It's like, looked to me like about 15 feet off the water. All right? Why is the Dead Sea low on water? Too many users. Okay, it's fed by the Jordan River. And Israel diverts water from the Jordan River, and I suspect Jordan does as well, to water their crops and to have their people have water to drink. And so there's less water going down to the Dead Sea, but the rate of evaporation is very high. The Dead Sea does not empty anywhere except up. Okay? There's no river exiting the Dead Sea. It all exits by evaporation. That's why it's never filled. But when you have less water going in, then the water level goes down. So the Dead Sea is very low right now. Okay? It's not inconceivable that, I don't know, in 100 years, 150 years, some preacher is going to be standing right here in this spot, in this building, and he's going to be talking about the Dead Sea, and he's going to talk about something that used to be there and isn't there anymore. Okay? Because you only have so much water coming out of the Jordan River, and when you're diverting it, the Dead Sea is not going to raise. Okay? So you've got a body of water over here that would have been higher. The Dead Sea extends down a good ways to the south. Qumran is here, which is on a relatively flat area. Okay? And this is that escarpment that begins the wilderness of Judea out this way. Very sparsely inhabited area. Okay? Not a whole lot of people living out here. But you've got this settlement there. So if the Roman army is marching up along the shoreline, they would encounter Qumran. Even if they didn't know it was there, they would encounter it eventually, marching up that way. Okay? And again, you wouldn't want those people there. And so, I'm not sure I remember the original question. It was about how they're hidden, or why they weren't hidden.
Yeah, I was just wondering, they must have been hidden pretty well for the Roman army, seems like to...
Well, again, because that Roman army is marching towards Jerusalem, which is up, well, that way. That way, over here.
That's looking south, basically?
Yeah, I think this is looking south. I usually mark that in my photos, and I didn't this time. I think it's looking south, in which case Jerusalem would be over here. If it's looking north, Jerusalem is over here, okay? The point is, they're on their way to Jerusalem. They don't have time to dig around in these caves. Interestingly, and I'll give this to you for free, even though our second bell is going to ring, they're discovered in 1947 by accident. Nobody's looking for these things. They're discovered by accident. So the Romans, they're not interested in this. They don't care anything about much scrolls. They care about potential enemies to their rear.
So they do feel confident that they were destroyed before Jerusalem. It wasn't Jerusalem destroyed.
Qumran was destroyed before Jerusalem, yes. They were destroyed by the Roman army on its way to Jerusalem.
Okay.
All right, very good. We're going to pick up at that slide that I stopped at. On Sunday, we're going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, okay? I think we'll do it in one class. If not, we'll do it in 1.5, and that'll be the next topic. All right? Thank you all very much.